David Morgan, a 45-year-old African-American man, was at the pinnacle of his career. From his luxurious office on the 50th floor of a skyscraper in the heart of New York City, he contemplated the urban skyline with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. As CEO of Future Petrol, one of the world's largest oil companies, he had achieved a level of success that few would have imagined for someone with his background. Born in a marginalized neighborhood of New Orleans, David had experienced poverty and racism firsthand. His mother, a domestic worker, and his father, a dock worker, had struggled tirelessly to give him an education. Those childhood memories, far from saddening him, motivated him every day to keep moving forward and fight for a more just world. As he reviewed the latest financial reports of his company, David couldn't help feeling that something was missing in his life. He had conquered the business world, but at what cost? His marriage had ended years ago, and his 20-year-old daughter, Lucy, was studying abroad. Loneliness overwhelmed him in moments like this. It was then that he remembered an old passion, something he had set aside in his rise to success: motorcycles. As a young man, David dreamed of traveling across the country on a luxury bike, feeling the freedom of the wind on his face. Now, with the means to fulfill that dream, he decided it was the perfect time to make it a reality. With renewed energy, David called his assistant, Mary. "Please cancel my afternoon appointments. I'm going out." Mary, surprised by her boss's sudden decision, nodded. "Of course, Mr. Morgan. Do you need me to arrange anything else?" "No, thank you. This is something I need to do for myself," David replied with an enigmatic smile. He left his office with determined steps, ignoring the curious looks from his employees. In the parking lot, he left aside his luxury chauffeured car and opted to take a taxi. "To the Elite Motor dealership in Manhattan, please," he instructed the driver. During the journey, David allowed himself to dream. He imagined the perfect motorcycle, powerful, elegant, a symbol of the freedom he longed for. He thought about the trips he could take, the roads he would travel, the wind caressing his face. For a moment, he stopped being the powerful CEO and became that young man full of dreams and ambitions again. Upon arriving at the dealership, David paused for a moment to admire the gleaming models displayed in the showroom window. He took a deep breath and entered, feeling more like a kid in a candy store than the magnate he was. The interior of Elite Motor was a spectacle of chrome and leather. Motorcycles of every imaginable luxury brand were perfectly aligned, their bodies shining under strategically placed lights. The aroma of new leather and motor oil filled the air, evoking a mix of luxury and adventure. David walked slowly, admiring each model, letting his fingers gently brush the leather seats and handlebars. He stopped in front of an imposing black motorcycle, its aerodynamic lines promising speed and excitement. "Excuse me, can I help you?" The sharp voice interrupted his thoughts. David turned to find himself face to face with Alan, an impeccably dressed salesman with an expression that oscillated between disdain and impatience. "Yes, I'm interested in purchasing a motorcycle," David responded with a friendly smile. Alan looked him up and down, his gaze lingering on David's suit, which, although designer, didn't flaunt visible logos. "Do you have any model in mind? We have options for various budgets." The condescending tone didn't go unnoticed by David, who decided to ignore it for the moment. "I'm interested in this model," he said, pointing to the black motorcycle. "Could you give me more details?" Alan raised an eyebrow. "That's our most exclusive model. Perhaps you'd like to see some more accessible options." David's patience was beginning to wear thin, but he maintained his composure. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm interested in this model. Could you give me the specifications?" With evident reluctance, Alan began to recite the motorcycle's features, his tone making it clear that he considered this a waste of time. As he spoke, another employee approached. It was Luis, a young mechanic who had been working on a nearby bike. "Excuse the interruption," Luis said with a genuine smile. "I couldn't help overhearing that you're interested in this model. If you'll allow me, I can show you some unique features that make it special." David welcomed the intervention with a gesture, while Alan glared at Luis. The young mechanic, however, continued enthusiastically, explaining the technical details and innovations of the model with passion and knowledge. Impressed by Luis's attitude, David decided it was time to reveal his identity. He took out his business card and handed it to Alan. I think this will clear up any doubts about my purchasing power." Alan's eyes widened as he read the name and title on the card. His face visibly paled. "Mr. Morgan, I had no idea. Please allow me to—" But David had already made a decision. "That won't be necessary. Luis, could you help me with the paperwork for the purchase?" As Luis, surprised but pleased, guided David to the office, Alan remained paralyzed, aware that his prejudice had cost him an important sale and possibly his job. David, for his part, left the dealership with mixed feelings. He had fulfilled his dream of buying the motorcycle of his dreams, but the bitter encounter with Alan reminded him that, despite his success, the world was still full of prejudice and discrimination. While waiting for his new acquisition to be prepared, David couldn't help but think about the experience. How many people would have gone through similar situations in that store? How many dreams would have been crushed by the attitude of salesmen like Alan? It was then that an idea began to form in his mind. Perhaps this experience wasn't just about fulfilling a personal dream. Maybe it was an opportunity to do something more, something that could change things. With this new determination, David got on his shiny new motorcycle, the roar of the engine resonating with his thoughts. As he drove away from the dealership, he didn't know that he had just taken the first step on a journey that would change not only his life, but the lives of many others. The days following were a whirlwind of activity for David. While overseeing the operations of his oil empire, a significant part of his mind was focused on researching Elite Motor. James, his head of corporate intelligence, had done a thorough job. "Mr. Morgan, I have the complete report on Elite Motor," announced James, entering David's office with a tablet in hand. David gestured for him to sit. "Go ahead. Tell me everything." "The situation is interesting," James began. "Elite Motor is part of an international franchise, but this particular branch has been having problems. Their sales have dropped 30% in the last year, and their online reputation is in the gutter." David raised an eyebrow. "Causes?" "Mainly poor customer service. There are dozens of negative reviews talking about discriminatory treatment, lack of professionalism, and inflated prices. But here's the most interesting part. The franchise is for sale." David's eyes sparkled with interest. "Continue." "The current owner, a Robert Foster, seems desperate to get rid of the business. According to our sources, he's willing to sell below market value." David leaned back in his chair, processing the information. The humiliation he had experienced wasn't an isolated incident, but a pattern of behavior that was sinking the business. He saw an opportunity not just for personal revenge, but for real transformation. "James, I want you to initiate the acquisition process. Use one of our subsidiaries to maintain anonymity, and I need a team of the best in dealership management and marketing." "Are you sure, sir? This is quite far from our core business." David smiled. "Sometimes, James, the best opportunities arise from the most unexpected places. Trust me." As James left the office, David remained contemplating the city through his window. His mind was already tracing plans, visualizing how he could transform Elite Motor into an example of excellence and inclusion. The following weeks were a frenzy of negotiations and planning. David kept his intentions secret, even from most of his executive team. Finally, the day to close the deal arrived. In a conference room of a prestigious law firm, David found himself face to face with Robert Foster, the still owner of Elite Motor. Foster, a man in his 60s with an air of faded aristocracy, seemed anxious to conclude the sale. "I must admit, Mr. Morgan, I'm intrigued," Foster said as they signed the documents. "It's not common for an oil company to be interested in a motorcycle dealership." David smiled enigmatically. "Let's say I have a personal interest in the world of two wheels." With a final handshake, the sale was completed. David was now the owner of Elite Motor. That same afternoon, David headed to the dealership. As he entered, he noticed how the employees looked at him with curiosity. Alan, the salesman who had despised him, approached with a servile smile. "Welcome back, sir. Have you come to see any particular model?" David looked at him steadily. "Actually, Alan, I've come to introduce myself. I'm the new owner of Elite Motor." Alan's face paled. Whispers spread through the store like a wave. "I want to see all the staff in the meeting room in 5 minutes, David announced firmly. As the employees gathered, nervous and confused, David mentally reviewed his plan. It wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to transform Elite Motor into an example of excellence and inclusion in the world of luxury motorcycles. In the meeting room, David stood in front of the group of employees. He recognized Luis, the young mechanic who had been kind to him, among the crowd. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began. "As you may have heard, I'm the new owner of Elite Motor. My name is David Morgan, and I'm here to announce some important changes." The employees exchanged nervous glances. "Elite Motor has lost its way," David continued. "We've alienated customers with poor service and discriminatory attitudes. That ends today." David paused, letting his words sink in. "From this moment on, we will implement a zero-tolerance policy towards any form of discrimination. Our goal will be to provide exceptional service to all customers, regardless of their appearance or origin." Alan, visibly uncomfortable, raised his hand. "Mr. Morgan, with all due respect, our customers are of a very specific profile. We can't simply—" David interrupted him. "That kind of thinking is exactly what has led us to this situation, Alan. And that's why I must inform you that your services will no longer be needed at Elite Motor." A sepulchral silence fell over the room. "For those who are willing to adopt this new vision, I offer you the opportunity to be part of something revolutionary in the industry. For those who are not, I thank you for your services up until now." David addressed Luis directly. "Luis, right? I'd like you to stay after the meeting. I have a proposal for you." As the meeting dissolved into a murmur of excited and worried voices, David knew that the real challenge was just beginning. Transforming Elite Motor wouldn't be an easy task, but he was determined to turn it into a model of inclusive and successful business. The weeks following the acquisition of Elite Motor were a whirlwind of activity. David, accustomed to handling crises in the oil world, found himself facing a completely new challenge. The transformation of the dealership required not just a change of image, but a complete restructuring from its foundations. The first step was forming a new management team. David promoted Luis, the young mechanic who had shown integrity and professionalism, to head of the workshop. "I want you to transmit those values to the entire technical team," David told him during their first official meeting. Luis, still surprised by his promotion, nodded with determination. "I won't let you down, Mr. Morgan." For the position of sales manager, David recruited Marina Ortiz, a digital marketing expert with experience in the automotive sector. "We need to change the public's perception," he explained during the interview. "I want Elite Motor to be synonymous with excellence and inclusion." Marina smiled, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "I have some ideas that I think you'll love, Mr. Morgan." The team was completed with Alexander Ruiz, a human resources specialist known for his focus on diversity and inclusion. "Your mission," David told him, "is to ensure that every Elite Motor employee understands and lives our new values." With the team in place, the real transformation began. The dealership closed its doors for 2 weeks for a complete renovation. The interior was redesigned to be more welcoming and less intimidating, with open spaces and comfortable waiting areas for customers. David insisted on installing a mural on the main wall, representing the diversity of motorcyclists. Men, women, young, old, of different ethnicities and lifestyles, all united by their passion for two wheels. "I want everyone who comes in here to feel represented and welcome," he explained to his team. Meanwhile, Marina worked tirelessly on the new marketing strategy. She launched a social media campaign titled "All Roads, All Stories," highlighting the diverse experiences of motorcyclists. "We need to change the narrative," she explained in a team meeting. "It's not just about selling luxury bikes, but about selling an inclusive and respectful experience." Alexander, for his part, implemented an intensive training program for all employees, focusing on customer service, cultural sensitivity, and ethical sales techniques. "Our goal," he told the employees during a session, "is for every customer to leave here feeling valued, respected, and excited, regardless of whether they buy a motorcycle or not." As the reopening date approached, tension and excitement grew. David spent long hours at the dealership, overseeing every detail from the arrangement of the motorcycles to the tone of communications with customers. One night, while reviewing the final preparations, David found himself alone in the showroom. He walked among the gleaming machines, remembering the boy who once dreamed of owning one of them. He gently touched the seat of a Ducati, similar to the one he had wanted to buy the day he was humiliated. "This is bigger than you, David," he said to himself. "It's about changing things, about opening doors that others have kept closed." The day of the reopening arrived with great expectation. David had decided not to make a big media event, preferring a more personal approach. He invited a diverse group of local motorcyclists, influencers from the motorcycle world, and, surprisingly, some of the customers who had left the worst reviews in the past. When the doors opened, the new Elite motor shone with its own light. The staff, dressed in new, elegant but accessible uniforms, welcomed each visitor with genuine warmth. David observed from a corner, his heart beating with a mixture of pride and nervousness. He saw Luis guiding a group through the workshop, explaining the latest technologies with passion. Marina was animatedly conversing with a group of young motorcyclists, showing them the brand's new social media initiatives. One moment in particular caught his attention. An older woman, clearly intimidated, was timidly entering the showroom. Immediately, one of the new salespeople approached her with a genuine smile, offering her a tour and patiently explaining the features of the different motorcycles. David couldn't help but smile. This was exactly the kind of change he had envisioned. However, not everything was perfect. He noticed some skeptical looks among the visitors, especially among those who had had bad experiences in the past. He knew that earning their trust would take time. At the end of the day, when the last visitor had gone, David gathered the entire team. "Today is just the beginning," he told them. "We've taken the first step on a long journey. There will be challenges, there will be doubts, but if we stay true to our vision, we will transform not just this store, but the entire industry." As the team applauded, David felt a mix of emotions. Pride in what they had achieved, determination in the face of challenges to come, and a spark of excitement for the journey that was just beginning. That night, as he closed the doors of Elite Motor, David looked up at the starry sky of New York City. "Mum," he whispered, "I hope you're proud. This is just the beginning." As the weeks passed, Elite Motor began to gain a new reputation in the world of luxury motorcycles. Social media buzzed with positive comments about the radical change in customer service and the welcoming atmosphere of the dealership. However, beneath the surface, currents of resistance were brewing that David and his team had not yet perceived. One sunny morning, David arrived at the dealership earlier than usual. As he entered, he immediately noticed that something wasn't right. Several employees, mainly those who had remained from the previous administration, were gathered in small groups, talking in low voices and casting furtive glances. "Good morning," David greeted with a smile, but the responses were tense and unenthusiastic. Marina, the marketing manager, quickly approached him with a worried expression. "David, we have a problem. Someone has been sabotaging our marketing efforts." "What do you mean?" David asked, frowning. "Our social media posts are being flooded with negative comments, and they're not from real customers. They seem to be bots or fake accounts. They're discrediting our message of inclusion and diversity." David felt a pang of concern. "Do you have any idea who might be behind this?" Marina shook her head. "Not with certainty, but—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "There are some patterns in the negative comments that seem suspicious. Many use similar phrasing and were posted within minutes of each other. It could be a coordinated attack." David frowned, his mind racing. "Do we have any way to trace these back to their source?" "We're working on it," Marina replied. "Our tech team is analyzing the data, but whoever is behind this is covering their tracks well." Just then, Luis burst into the room, his face flushed with excitement. "Boss, you're not going to believe this. Remember that old security camera we installed in the back alley after the graffiti incident?" David nodded, leaning forward with interest. "Well," Luis continued, "I was reviewing the footage from last night, and look what I found." He pulled out his tablet and played a video. The grainy footage showed two figures in dark clothing, their faces obscured by hoodies, spray painting something on the wall of Motor Elite. As one of them turned, a logo became visible on the back of their jacket, the emblem of the Association of Luxury Motorcycle Dealers. "It's not definitive proof," Luis said, "but it's certainly suspicious." David stood up, his expression a mix of anger and determination. "This goes beyond simple competition. They're trying to destroy everything we've built." Marina spoke up, her voice calm but firm. We need to be careful how we handle this, David. If we accuse them without solid evidence, it could backfire. David nodded, taking a deep breath to calm himself. You're right. We need a strategy. One that not only counters their attacks, but also reinforces our message of inclusivity. He turned to his team, his eyes blazing with renewed purpose. Here's what we're going to do. Marina, I want you to prepare a press release. We'll address the accusations head-on, but we'll also highlight our community initiatives and the positive impact we've had. Luis, he continued, work with our legal team. We need to know our options if we decide to pursue this further. And Alejandro, he said, turning to his HR director, I want you to organize a town hall meeting with all our employees. They need to hear from us directly about what's happening and our plan to address it. As his team nodded in agreement, David felt a surge of pride. Despite the challenges, they were united, ready to face whatever came their way. One more thing, David added, a small smile playing on his lips. I think it's time we launch that mentorship program we've been discussing. Let's show everyone that our commitment to inclusivity goes beyond just selling motorcycles. As the team dispersed to carry out their tasks, David walked to the window, looking out at the city. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was more convinced than ever that they were on the right path. In the distance, he could hear the rumble of motorcycles, a sound that once represented exclusivity and elitism. Now, to him, it was the sound of change, of barriers being broken down. Motor Elite was more than a business. It was a movement, and movements, he knew, couldn't be stopped by a few acts of sabotage. Bring it on, he murmured to himself, his resolve hardening. The real fight was just beginning, and he was ready for it. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, David knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. But with his team by his side, and the support of a growing community of diverse motorcycle enthusiasts, he felt ready to face whatever came their way. The revolution they had started was gaining momentum, and there was no turning back now. David turned back to his desk, picking up a framed photo of his mother. "We're making a difference, Mom," he said softly. "Just like you always taught me to do." With renewed determination, he set the photo down and began to outline their next moves. The night was young, and there was still much work to be done. The future of Motor Elite, and perhaps the entire motorcycle industry, hung in the balance. But David Mendez was ready for the ride of his life. As the city lights began to twinkle in the growing darkness, the sound of motorcycles continued to echo in the distance, a reminder of the community they were building and the changes they were making. It was the sound of progress, of inclusivity, and of a future where everyone had a place on the open road. The next morning dawned bright and early, with David arriving at Motor Elite before the sun had fully risen. The events of the previous day weighed heavily on his mind, but he was determined to turn this challenge into an opportunity. As he walked through the showroom, he noticed something that made him pause. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, was intently studying one of the high-end motorcycles. Her clothes were worn, and she seemed out of place among the luxury bikes, but her eyes sparkled with unmistakable passion. David approached her with a warm smile. "Good morning. Interested in motorcycles?" The young woman jumped slightly, looking embarrassed. "Oh, I'm sorry, I know I probably shouldn't be here. I was just dreaming, I guess." "Dreaming is exactly what you should be doing here," David replied, extending his hand. "I'm David Mendez, the owner of Motor Elite, and you are?" "Sophia," she said, shaking his hand hesitantly. "Sophia Ramirez. I've always loved motorcycles, but I never thought I could actually own one, especially not one like this." David's eyes lit up. Here was a perfect example of why Motor Elite's mission was so important. "Sophia, let me tell you something. Dreams are the first step to reality. Why don't you join me for a coffee and we can talk about motorcycles?" As they sat in David's office, Sophia opened up about her passion for motorcycles and her frustration with the industry's perceived exclusivity. David listened intently, seeing in her the same fire that had driven him to transform Motor Elite. "Sophia," David said as their conversation came to an end, "how would you like to be part of our new mentorship program? We're looking for passionate individuals like you to help us shape the future of motorcycling." Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief. "Me? But I don't have any experience. I've never even owned a motorcycle." David smiled. "Experience isn't just about ownership. It's about passion, determination, and a willingness to learn. Those are qualities you have in abundance. As Sophia left the office, her face beaming with excitement, David felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why they were fighting so hard against the old guard of the industry, for people like Sophia, who deserved a chance to be part of the motorcycling world. Later that day, as David prepared for the town hall meeting with his employees, he couldn't help but feel a mix of anxiety and determination. He knew that transparency was crucial in this moment of crisis. The conference room was packed, with employees from every department of Motor Elite present. David took a deep breath and began to speak. "I'm sure many of you have heard the rumors and seen the negative press," he started. "I want to be completely honest with you. We are under attack, not just our business, but our vision of an inclusive motorcycling community." A murmur went through the crowd, but David pressed on. "But here's what I want you all to remember. We are not just selling motorcycles. We are changing lives. We are opening doors that have been closed for too long, and that makes us a threat to those who profit from exclusivity." He went on to outline the steps they were taking to counter the attacks and reaffirm their commitment to inclusivity. As he spoke, he could see the worry in some faces turn to determination. "I met a young woman named Sophia this morning," David said, wrapping up his speech. "She represents everything we're fighting for. A passionate motorcyclist who never thought she'd have a place in this industry. We're going to prove her wrong. We're going to prove everyone who doubts us wrong." The room erupted in applause, the energy palpable. As David looked out at the sea of faces, diverse in age, gender, and ethnicity, he felt a surge of pride. This was his team, united in a common purpose. As the meeting dispersed, David pulled Marina aside. "How's the press release coming along?" Marina grinned. "I think you're going to like it. We're not just defending ourselves, we're going on the offensive. We're challenging the entire industry to match our commitment to inclusivity." David nodded approvingly. "Perfect. And Luis, any updates from the legal team?" Luis nodded. "They think we have a case for defamation, but they suggest we hold off on legal action for now. Instead, they recommend we focus on positive PR and community outreach." "Good," David said. "We'll fight this battle in the court of public opinion first. Alejandro, how quickly can we get that mentorship program up and running?" Alejandro smiled. "Give me a week, and we'll be ready to launch. I've already got a list of potential mentors and mentees." As his team dispersed to carry out their tasks, David felt a renewed sense of energy. The challenges they faced were significant, but so was their determination. Motor Elite wasn't just weathering the storm. They were riding into it, ready to emerge stronger on the other side. That night, as David locked up the showroom, he paused to look at the mural of diverse motorcyclists that adorned the wall. Each face represented a story, a dream, a potential changed life, and that, he realized, was worth fighting for. The sound of a motorcycle engine roared in the distance, and David smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but it would also bring new opportunities to change the face of motorcycling, and he was ready for the ride. As the days turned into weeks, Motor Elite's response to the crisis began to take shape. The mentorship program, now officially named Ride with Pride, was launched with great fanfare. Sophia Ramirez, the young woman David had met in the showroom, became the face of the program, her story resonating with many who had felt excluded from the world of luxury motorcycles. The press release Marina had crafted turned out to be a masterstroke. Instead of merely defending against the accusations, it challenged the entire industry to match Motor Elite's commitment to inclusivity. The hashtag #RideWithPride began trending on social media, with thousands sharing their own stories of overcoming barriers in the motorcycling world. One morning, as David was reviewing the latest sales figures, which, despite the negative campaign, had actually seen an uptick, Lucia burst into his office. "David, you need to see this," she said, turning on the large screen on the wall. It was a live news broadcast. The reporter was standing in front of the headquarters of the Association of Luxury Motorcycle Dealers. "In a shocking turn of events," the reporter was saying, "several members of the association have come forward with allegations of unethical practices and pressure to conform to exclusionary policies. This comes in the wake of Motor Elite's challenge to the industry to embrace inclusivity." David watched, stunned, as the report continued. It seemed that their stand had inspired others within the industry to speak out. Just then his phone rang. It was Joaquin Herrera. "David, my friend." Joaquin's voice boomed through the speaker. "I hope you're watching the news. It seems your little revolution is spreading." David couldn't help but smile. "It's more than we could have hoped for, Joaquin, but I have a feeling the real fight is just beginning." "Indeed," Joaquin agreed, "which is why I'm calling. The International Motorcycling Federation is convening an emergency meeting to discuss the future of the sport. They want you there." David's heart raced. This was an opportunity to bring their message of inclusivity to the highest levels of the motorcycling world. "When and where?" he asked. "Next week in Geneva," Joaquin replied. "Be prepared, David. This could change everything." As David hung up the phone, he felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The stakes had just been raised dramatically. Motor Elite was no longer just fighting for its own future, but potentially for the future of motorcycling as a whole. He called his team together, sharing the news and beginning to plan for the Geneva meeting. As they discussed strategies and talking points, David couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. From a single act of discrimination in a motorcycle showroom to potentially reshaping the entire industry, it was almost too much to comprehend. Later that evening, as the sun set over the city, David found himself back in the showroom. He walked among the gleaming motorcycles, each one a testament to the power of dreams and the importance of inclusivity. He stopped at a particular bike, the model he had tried to buy on that fateful day when he was turned away. Running his hand along its sleek frame, he smiled to himself. "Look how far we've come," he murmured. The sound of motorcycles rumbled in the distance, a constant reminder of the community they were building and the changes they were making. As David looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness, he knew that the journey ahead would be challenging. But he also knew that they were no longer riding alone. The revolution they had started was gaining momentum, and there was no turning back now. With renewed determination, David turned back to his office. There was much to do before Geneva, and he was ready to take on the world. The future of motorcycling was about to be reshaped, and Motor Elite would be at the forefront of that change. As he sat down at his desk to begin preparations, David couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. The open road ahead was full of possibilities, and he was ready to ride into whatever came next. The week leading up to the Geneva meeting was a whirlwind of activity. David and his team worked tirelessly, preparing presentations, gathering data, and fine-tuning their message. They knew that this was their chance to make a lasting impact on the motorcycling world. The night before their departure, David called a final team meeting. As he looked around the room at the faces of those who had been with him through this journey, he felt a surge of pride and gratitude. "Tomorrow, we're not just representing Motor Elite," he began. "We're representing every person who's ever felt excluded from the world of motorcycling, every dreamer who's been told they don't belong, every innovator who's been shut out because they didn't fit the mold." He paused, making eye contact with each team member. "But we're also representing the future, a future where the joy of riding isn't limited by gender, race, or social status, where the open road is truly open to all." Marina raised her hand. "David, I've been thinking, maybe we should bring Sophia with us." David raised an eyebrow. "Sophia, our mentorship program poster girl?" Marina nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. Her story is powerful. It puts a face to everything we're fighting for." The team murmured in agreement, and David felt a smile spread across his face. "Brilliant idea, Marina. Make it happen." As the meeting adjourned, Luis pulled David aside. "Boss, there's something else you should know. Remember those security camera footage we found?" David nodded, his expression turning serious. "Well," Luis continued, lowering his voice, "we've managed to enhance the image. We can clearly identify one of the individuals. It's Carlos Vega." David's eyes widened. Carlos Vega, the president of the Association of Luxury Motorcycle Dealers, caught red-handed vandalizing Motor Elite. It was the smoking gun they'd been looking for. "What do you want to do?" Luis asked. David thought for a moment. This information could destroy Vega and potentially the entire association. But was that really the goal? "Hold on to it," David finally said. "We'll use it if we have to, But let's see how things play out in Geneva first. Our goal isn't to destroy anyone, it's to change the industry for the better." Luis nodded, understanding the weight of the decision. The next morning, as David boarded the plane to Geneva with his team and a nervous but excited Sophia, he felt a mix of emotions. Anticipation, determination, and a touch of anxiety swirled in his mind. As the plane took off, David looked out the window at the sprawling cityscape below. Somewhere down there were countless individuals like Sophia, dreamers who had been told their whole lives that the world of luxury motorcycles wasn't for them. "We're going to change that," he murmured to himself, "one ride at a time." The flight to Geneva was long, giving David plenty of time to reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. From that first humiliating experience in the showroom to building Motor Elite into a beacon of inclusivity in the motorcycling world, it had been a wild ride. As they began their descent into Geneva, David turned to Sophia, who was nervously fidgeting with her seatbelt. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. Sophia gave a shaky smile. "Terrified," she admitted. "I've never been out of the country before, let alone spoken in front of important people like this." David patted her hand reassuringly. "Just remember, Sophia, your story is powerful. It's the reason we're all here. Just speak from your heart, and you'll do great." As they exited the concession, David couldn't help but feel a mix of determination and apprehension. He knew that the real battle was just beginning. The storm was approaching, and it would be fierce. While driving home, David couldn't stop thinking about the experience. Had he taken things too far? Was he putting everything he had worked for at risk? But then he remembered the smile on the face of a young African-American customer who had bought her first luxury motorcycle the week before, and how she had said she had never felt so welcome in a dealership before. "No," David thought, "this is bigger than me, bigger than Motor Elite. It's about changing an entire industry." With that renewed conviction, David headed home, mentally preparing himself for the challenges ahead. The storm was coming, but he was ready to face it. The weeks following the meeting with the Dealers Association were tense. As David had feared, obstacles began to arise. Some suppliers mysteriously delayed their deliveries, while specialized motorcycle magazines seemed to ignore Motor Elite's innovations in their articles. However, David and his team didn't give up. Luis had managed to establish new relationships with alternative suppliers, while Marina worked tirelessly on a guerrilla marketing campaign that was gaining traction on social media. One afternoon, as David was reviewing the latest sales reports in his office, Lucia, his assistant, rushed in. "Mr. Mendez, you have an unexpected visitor," she announced with a tone of surprise in her voice. Before David could ask who it was, an imposing figure entered the office. It was Joaquin Herrera, the legendary motorcycle champion and one of the most respected figures in the world of two wheels. "Mr. Herrera," said David, rising to greet the newcomer, "it's an honor to have you here." Joaquin, a man in his 50s with a sun-weathered face and scars from old falls, shook David's hand firmly. "The honor is mine, Mr. Mendez," Joaquin replied. "I've been following what you're doing here at Motor Elite. I must say I'm impressed." David gestured for Joaquin to take a seat. "I appreciate your words, but I'm afraid not everyone shares your opinion." Joaquin let out a laugh. "Oh, I'm aware of the resistance you're facing. In fact, that's why I'm here." David looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "You see, Mr. Mendez, I've been in this industry for years. I've seen how exclusivity has become synonymous with exclusion. I've always believed that motorcycles are about freedom, about breaking barriers. What you're doing here, it's revolutionary." David felt a wave of emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Herrera, but I'm afraid we're facing an uphill battle." Joaquin leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with determination. "That's why I'm here. I want to help. I have connections throughout the industry, from manufacturers to motorcycle clubs. I believe together we can make real change." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Mr. Herrera, your support would mean a lot to us, but I must warn you, aligning yourself with us could affect your own reputation." Joaquin waved a hand dismissively. "I've won enough races in my life, Mr. Mendez. It's time to win one that really matters." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Joaquin Herrera became the unofficial ambassador for Motor Elite, using his influence to open doors that were previously closed. One afternoon, as David and Joaquin were discussing strategies at the dealership, a group of motorcyclists entered the showroom. To David's surprise, he recognized several of them as members of Rides Without Borders, an African-American motorcycle club from Veracruz that had gained notoriety for their charitable work. The leader of the group, a tall, strong man named Marcus, approached them with a smile. "Mr. Mendez, Mr. Herrera," he greeted. "We've heard about what you're doing here. We want to be part of this." David looked at Joaquin, who returned a knowing smile. "I told you they would come," the champion murmured. In the weeks that followed, Motor Elite became the center of a growing network of alliances. Motorcycle clubs from all over Mexico began to show their support. Social media influencers, attracted by the message of inclusion, began promoting the brand. The pressure from the Dealers Association was still present, but now Motor Elite had an army of defenders ready to face any attempt at sabotage. One night, after a particularly hectic day, David found himself alone in the showroom. He walked among the gleaming motorcycles, remembering how all this had started with a childhood dream and an experience of discrimination. "Who would have thought, huh?" said a voice behind him. It was Joaquin, who had returned to pick up some papers. David smiled. "Certainly not me. But this is bigger than anything I could have imagined." Joaquin put a hand on David's shoulder. "And this is just the beginning, my friend. We're changing more than an industry, we're changing mindsets." As they left the dealership that night, David couldn't help but feel a wave of optimism. The storm was still raging, but now they had an army to face it. And with each passing day, that army grew. Tomorrow will be another day of battle, David thought. But now, we are no longer alone.